Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 42, featuring Dr. Jane Thomason. And this week we are doing things a little bit differently. So I want to thank everybody who's tuning in on the live stream. This is going to be a pre-recorded episode. Dr. Jane Thomason is a very busy metaverse advocate and a futurist. As I say on the episode, I saw her on CNN. I also saw her on a couple live conferences about Web3 and the metaverse, and she's always a very engaging and passionate speaker on the topic of the metaverse. So I was really excited to be able to interview her, but with her schedule, it just worked out that we had to really pre-record it and get that hour of time where I could. So I was really happy to get it. To make the matter a little bit more complicated, I was also fighting a bit of a cold, so it was interesting, but it was all good, and I was really excited to be able to talk to her about the metaverse, and I hope that everybody gets a lot out of it. It was very engaging. I think we touched on a lot of really kind of future forward points about what we can expect to see in the metaverse. You can see my guy here is just hanging out in Chrome World, which you can go see at chrome.world if you want to check it out yourself. It's got a bunch of my NFT art and collection, my personal collection in there. So without too much further ado, we're going to be playing the pre-recorded interview. I do want to encourage anybody who's tapping in on the live stream to feel free to share any questions, thoughts in the chat. I'll be engaging in the chat, and then we can also have a conversation about some of the topics that are discussed in the episode afterwards, if there is appetite for that. But we'll see how things go. I hope that everyone finds it as engaging as I did. The podcast will be live right away this afternoon, so everything's pretty much edited already. So I just wanted to air it here first, and then it'll be live on YouTube and all the podcast networks shortly after. So yes, it's really, really cool. Dr. Jane Thomason, I was a little starstruck just because I probably watch too much media, and I just really was interested in this one interview that she did on CNN with a few other kind of metaverse developers and thinkers, and it was a really cool interview. I'll share the link in the chat maybe later, but yeah, we were able to touch on some of the points that she discussed there, as well as a few other really interesting kind of bleeding edge conversations about what could happen with the metaverse, a lot of the best case scenario. What's up, Sasha? Thanks for dropping in. So yeah, without further ado, we will get this pre-recorded episode going here. So hopefully it all works out well. Tested it a few times, should be good. So let's go. Get myself off the screen here. And thank you again for tuning in. Feel free to ask your questions, chat in the live chat, and we'll reconvene right after the episode. So thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 42, featuring Dr. Jane Thomason, a futurist and major metaverse advocate who I'm very grateful to have here. I've seen her talk a couple times on the topic of the metaverse, and most recently saw her in a really interesting CNN documentary about the metaverse, where they really spoke to Web2, kind of meta/Facebook kind of metaverse, and then the more blockchain-oriented Somnium Space, Voxels, Decentraland, and it was a really cool kind of juxtaposition and comparison. So thank you so much, Dr. Jane, for joining us here. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Awesome. I'm glad you're doing well. So as always at the Web3 Warriors, I'm David Karoma, your host. I go by Chrome in the metaverse, and we're always focused on the creator economy that's kind of being built on the blockchain. And whether that's in the metaverse, which we're going to talk about today, and we're always very interested in, or whether that's just through artwork or other creative endeavors on the blockchain being minted and sold as NFTs. So today we really just want to look at the broad topic of the metaverse, the future of the metaverse, where we think it's evolving to, and, importantly, the difference between kind of the, I would say, pre-blockchain Web 2, quote unquote, metaverse, and the forward-looking kind of decentralized ownership, having your own digital wallet, and the metaverses that are really taking advantage of that element of Web 3 and the blockchain integration. So without too much further ado, we'll go to you, Dr. Jane. I know you're really busy. So before we get into the metaverse conversation, maybe you can just share a little bit about your background and what brought you to Web 3 and blockchain. And thank you again for joining.
Yeah, great to be there. Well, in 2010, my son told me to buy Bitcoin, and I laughed at him, haha, and I didn't do it. And then he came back in 2016 and he said, "Hey, Mum, did you buy Bitcoin when I told you?" And I said, "No." And I think by that time, maybe it was $600, but it was 10 cents when he was first spruiking it. And he said, now listen, Mum, Bitcoin's built on blockchain and it's going to change everything. And you need to learn about blockchain. So I was suitably chastened. I still didn't buy any Bitcoin, by the way, but I started to learn about blockchain. And it was actually pretty hard because it's very counterintuitive. It's really different than everything that we grow up with centralized systems. And it took me ages to really figure out why it was even relevant to me. But I had a kind of epiphany at some point where I suddenly, so my background's been in emerging economies in developing countries. And so I've seen what the poorest and most vulnerable people on the planet, what their lives are like, what they don't have, how they're not connected, and so forth. And then suddenly I kind of connected that world with this peer-to-peer, transparent, efficient way of transferring value. And I suddenly realized for humanitarian settings, for financial inclusion, for medical supply chains, for identity, for land registration, it suddenly just dawned on me how transformative this technology really could be.
Nice.
And I just decided it was my mission from then on to figure this out myself, because in 2017 no one was talking about social impact or transformation. It was just all ICOs and everyone was
Yeah.
having a token sale and
That was the
making
ICO craze for
ridiculous
sure.
amounts of money for nothing. So it was actually hard to get a voice in those days, but I persisted. And so I started writing about, okay, how is it going to impact on financial inclusion, humanitarian, and I just started sharing my views with people and trying to find projects that were working in these areas, and mainly in emerging economies. So I've been working with a number of projects since 2017, and so happy to see them grow and continue and expand and see what they can do. So that's my blockchain journey. And
Nice.
then blockchain, of course, 2017, 18, then there was this quiet period for blockchain. And then the pandemic gave us life again, and DeFi went wild, and NFTs went wild, and play to earn games went wild. And, then kind of coming out of that was this Web3, the internet of value. And then Zuckerberg last October sort of leaps up and makes his announcement about Meta and the metaverse. And I just wanted to bring all this together and kind of understand what it could be and could do, and not the Zuckerberg metaverse, because I kind of think there's four strands of metaverse actually.
Hmm.
One is the big tech, Zuckerberg, Apple, Google, and so forth. And they're just going to be another extension of what they already do, which is extract value from you, take your data, take your money, and they'll do that in the metaverse. And
Exactly.
then you've got the gaming community, which already had many of the features of the metaverse, that they were using in playing the games. And they had the assets. You couldn't necessarily exchange value for them before, but now you can. So they've kind of embraced the token economy. And they've got 3 billion users worldwide. So they're going to be an incredibly important vector for blockchain and metaverse. Then you've got the Web3 community, who are building this decentralized internet of value that's peer-to-peer, and where creators get rewarded for what they do. And I don't know if it's a fourth strand, but I'm going to make it a fourth strand, which is governments, because you're seeing,
Mm.
the city of Seoul in Korea announcing government services are going on the metaverse, NEOM in Saudi Arabia, Dubai with its metaverse strategy. And so I think you're not, you are already seeing governments realizing that there are certain aspects of their services that they can provide in this always on immersive environment that are going to help them make better connections and provide better services to their citizens. So
Wow.
that's kind of how I got there. And now it's my mission to figure out how this is going to work in different sectors and industries, and help people understand this is not a game your kid is playing.
Right.
This is something that's going to give value to you.
No doubt. That was amazing summation. I agree fully. Looking at the way that the blockchain and the gaming community specifically, those two major elements are kind of probably mostly the focus of Web3 Warriors here, and really the inspiration of for me to get into blockchain and NFTs more broadly. Like, I often say I kind of come from a gaming background. I've always seen the potential of, like, kind of escaping into a digital world and, having fun with games and all that kind of stuff. And then when I realized that this is just adding a whole new layer of value to that world, it was just a no-brainer. And like you said, it should be a kind of natural connection for gamers. Unfortunately, I can tell you, as somebody who's in these gaming communities and like watching streamers and talking to people, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as they call it in the space, the FUD. And for whatever reason, the gaming community hasn't quite latched on to Web3 the way that many artists and creator community has. So it's interesting to see as that evolves. There's a new project called the Unioverse. I don't know if you've heard of it yet, but it's got a few different, like, real heavy hitters from the gaming industry, people who like built GTA. I think some were on Fortnite. So like some really big hitters from the traditional gaming space, but they're very much trying to take a Web3 approach to it. So they're really just giving out their digital assets to start with so that they can build a really big community and then like actually encourage the community to take part in building the space, building the game. Now, it's not a metaverse per se. It's not super open, but it will have metaverse qualities, right? Where you still have the ability to buy and sell and trade. So that's really exciting. And I love those 4 definitions. And government is definitely an interesting one. I think we're seeing some of that in Canada here as well. Obviously, Ethereum comes from Toronto, and there are some forward-thinking municipal people that are trying to look into how best to kind of work into the metaverse and use that for government, for sure. So more broadly, I guess you kind of touched on this already, but what has you kind of so passionately like advocating for the metaverse? Is there a bright future you see of accessibility, of economic opportunity? What's got you so passionately kind of pushing this, banging this drum?
Yes, I think there's a couple of angles to it, but I want to just start on the gaming side with what we learned in the pandemic with Axie Infinity, because what we learned was anyone with a mobile phone was able to essentially play that game and earn money when the Philippines was shut down and people in the cash economy couldn't earn money. It gave them a way to do it. And while I know, and people will be very quick to tell me that the whole token economics in the end didn't work,
Right.
we learned that if you build it better and if you really think about what you're trying to achieve with the game, that you're creating new economic opportunities for people in emerging economies. And I think that's super powerful. So that really, got me excited about that whole aspect of it. But in terms of, the metaverse that's not gaming, what we're seeing already is that health sector, for example, in India, Apollo Hospitals is partnering with a gaming company to help build a metaverse around treating anxiety disorders. So mental health is going to be one area where we expect to see metaverse therapy being developed, and it already is. And so I came out of the healthcare sector. I didn't mention that before, and I've worked in it for many years. So I started saying, well, okay, let's think about the healthcare sector, which is under-resourced, overstretched, doesn't have enough people, and we have this huge burden of obesity and chronic diseases. Is there something that we can do with this opportunity that's going to work in the healthcare sector? And my conclusion is actually a resounding yes. And it's evidenced by the numbers of companies that are actually working on metaverse and healthcare. But just to sort of briefly give you and your viewers, an insight into this. So in the first place, we can start with education and think about how we train students to be doctors and nurses. So in the olden days, you were learning about anatomy of the human body by cutting up frogs and then cutting up cadavers.
Right.
But now you can take them into this immersive world where they can go inside the body and they can walk around and see the heart and the lungs and how all the organs connect up and learn it in a much more realistic, exciting way. But also you think about what you're teaching them to do. If you're teaching them to do surgery, you're going to have the possibility, working on a digital twin of a body, they can learn how to do surgery and practice and practice and practice and get it right.
Right.
And so in a much more realistic, immersive, and exciting way, people are going to be able to be educated in all aspects of healthcare. So the next one that I think is really important for not just for medicine, but for science in general is scientific collaboration. So instead of what's happened in the past where WHO flies 20 people to Geneva for a week and they sit around a table and talk about something once a year, that you can have this ongoing, immersive, scientific collaborative space where people can come with their realistic avatars and they can discuss, they can work on digital twins for new hospitals, new operations, looking at drug discovery and all sorts of other things like that. With digital whiteboards and workspaces, they don't need buildings. And I think that's going to be a massive boost to scientific discovery. And then the other one, and this is where I think we can borrow some of the gaming aspect of it. If you think about chronic disease and obesity and those kinds of things, we need people to eat better. We need people to do more exercise. So we're already seeing games being developed that are incentivizing people to do exercise. And I think we're going to see a lot more incentivization for people to do things to be more healthy using that gamified aspect of blockchain. And then I think the other aspect of it is if you think about people who are old, people who have mental health problems, people who are disabled, it's not easy for them to leave their homes to go and get advice and seek care. And as long as it's not an emergency crisis like a heart attack or a car accident, they're going to be able to enter the immersive healthcare clinic environment, go chat with their nurse avatar. They'll be using wearables that can track a lot of their physiological state and then discuss what their problems are. And then the avatar can decide whether they can be referred to other services or whether they actually need to go and see a clinician. So it'll extend what the health service can do, but also make it a lot more accessible for people who find it difficult to leave their homes. So there's actually more than that, but I'll stop there because that's probably a lot for people to take in.
No doubt, no doubt. A lot of different avenues. So that's a very good reason to be passionate about advocating for the metaverse. And yeah, I think it's removing a lot of barriers that definitely have existed and decreasing the cost of training, the cost of connecting with people, like you said, like big conferences that people spend many hundreds of thousands of dollars to organize and fly people out. Maybe you still have one of those a year, but now you can have a lot of other kind of smaller meetings in between. Yeah, we spoke to Stephen from Nanome, who kind of looked at decentralized science, and it was a really cool topic, just kind of looking at what the blockchain can do. So as a futurist, do you see like an ideal trajectory for the metaverse? And then I would ask the same about the blockchain, because I think everything you're talking about is like best case scenario. So how do you see it unfolding as far as best case scenario for the metaverse?
Well, so for me, the best case scenario and the people who will, um, I'm going to say win, but that's not really what I mean. But we're always talking about mass adoption. I can tell you with great confidence, no one's going to have mass adoption with Oculus goggles on. So A, they
Right.
can't afford it, and B, it's clunky and uncomfortable and all of the problems. So I think the big breakthrough will be when people can invent that kind of immersive experience using a mobile phone, because that's when you're going to be able to reach so many people who could benefit from this. And I've actually had two conversations, in the last week with universities from Pakistan who are working on exactly that, because they know people in countries like Pakistan are never going to be able to afford the expensive infrastructure that gamers use, for example. So the global access is going to be when someone figures out how to give that experience on a mobile phone, because 70% of the world's population now have access to mobile phones, and the penetration's growing all the time. So that's the first piece, is if the metaverse is going to really be meaningful and powerful and create change, it has to be accessible to a majority of people. So someone's got to work on that. We've still got issues around interoperability that needs to be worked on. But I think the other point that's really important to make is that we've got Gen Alpha coming along.
Hmm.
They're the
Is that what we're
next
calling them?
customers of
Gen
blockchain.
Alpha?
Yeah, exactly. And they've grown up digitally. They've
Hmm.
grown up in immersive spaces on the internet. And we need to be thinking about how we make this attractive and appealing and usable to them. And they don't want, so it's like what you were talking about, the community driven gaming.
Right.
Gen Alpha aren't going to want someone to make a product and give it to them. They're going to want to be involved in shaping that product. So I think we've got a movement of consumers coming through who are going to both embrace this, and they're going to see quite quickly how it can be used to help them, and they're socially aware. So they're interested in
Yeah.
climate change, they're interested in sustainability, and they're going to demand that. So I'm very optimistic that this new generation of consumers are going to be able to understand the technology and how it can be used and drive the change in the directions that they want to see. So people like my generation probably won't even ever get on the metaverse, or only 6 of us will, but it's the young ones coming through who are going to be the most important. And I think it's going to be an adjunct that enables them to make their worlds a better place.
No doubt. So on the mobile point, do you think that augmented reality will actually surpass virtual reality then? Because that would be more of an augmented reality metaverse as opposed to VR, right?
Look, I'm not a technical person, but based on what I've seen, and there's some really amazing things that are being done with augmented reality using mobile phones already.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be something like that. But, as I said, we're used to innovation coming from the West and then diffusing, to the South, if you like. I think what we're seeing now is there's so many great technologists in Asia and in Africa, and they're innovating and they're developing really interesting things. So I think we're going to see some major innovations that come out of those regions, but they're going to be solving problems on a scale that we tend not to think about.
Awesome, awesome. So I don't have to ask. You're definitely on the very pro decentralization side of things, right? I think you're seeing the power of that, right? The power of that sovereign ownership, sovereign creativity, being able to say, "Hey, I built this. Do you like it? Here, like support me." Through peer-to-peer transactions.
Mm.
Whether in the metaverse or on the blockchain. So yeah, it's really exciting. So on that point, when looking at, like you said earlier, whether it's Zuckerberg's metaverse or others that are a little bit more kind of the same, but just putting a new face on it, but still, mining your data, still taking, 40%, 50% of the revenue that you make from your sales of digital assets on that platform. And they'll say, oh, you get to keep 60%, such a good deal, Meanwhile, on the blockchain Web3 ones, you're keeping like 90% or 95% of the stuff that you sell. So how do you see that kind of friction maybe, evolving, as obviously Meta would love to just like define the metaverse for the whole world, whereas, places like maybe Somnium Space, Voxels is another one I'm a big fan of. For your point about accessibility, right? Voxels you can actually just open on your phone and jump into the metaverse, so it's super cool. But yeah, looking at that contrast, how do you see that evolving? And do you think it's just kind of to each their own, and Meta will do their thing, and those who see the value in Web3 will do their thing? Or do you think that there's going to be kind of like one to rule them all, or maybe not one to rule them all, but at least one ethos, like Web2 metaverses will just fall out of favor kind of thing?
Well, look, I definitely don't think there'll be one to rule them all. I think there'll be like a whole
Right.
suite, but I hope we can get some interoperability so people can move amongst them. I mean, I want to take my avatar into all these places, so
Right.
I want to be able to do that. But I think, on the issue of Meta versus Web3, we need to be really cognizant of the fact that Facebook Meta has already got billions of users on their platform,
Yeah.
and it's most likely if Meta offers them something else that they can get without much difficulty, they're probably going to use it. They're probably not going to realize it could be decentralized. I could get better value. So I think there's a reality there that they've got that consumer market. And I think the challenge for the Web3 metaverses, I really think, gaming and Web3 need to get married, and we need to, think about the 3 billion gamers and
That's what
think
I'm
about how
saying
we're
too.
going to
Exactly.
get them really excited about Web3 and convert them somehow. You said they're not necessarily getting it yet, but hopefully they will, because then you have a huge community of people who can start, they might discover it through gaming, but they might also be able to be a content creator, or they might find other ways that they can use this metaverse experience that's going to make their life better. So I mean, that's a little bit Peter Panish, I know, but
Mhm.
I just don't think it's going to be a clear pathway. I think there's going to be a lot of development. I can't say, because I don't like what Meta are trying to do, that they won't be successful. They quite well will be, because they've got all the customers. But I think if, like, Web3's just got to figure out how to build its community and how to build its following, and collaborate together, because I think we are stronger together. And I think if we can bring the Web3 community together and the metaverse community and, the better parts of the blockchain community, and I say that very purposefully, then I think that, we've got a good opportunity, because it's an incredible technology. There's absolutely brilliant people working in it, many of whom are serious and building things that are going to last, and some of whom are really a bit shabby, and we're embarrassed of them. And we've seen that just this last week. But we have to
Yeah.
move on, because this is a new technology. We're going through growing pains, and I think there's enough people who are really serious and see the benefits of the decentralized future that we will overcome this, the events of the last week, and we're going to move on and get stronger.
So the power is in the technology, right? We don't have to be too concerned about these centralized exchanges and their shenanigans. I was listening to a room earlier, just talking about, this is why we do not support, centralized exchanges as far as keeping your actual crypto on them. You can use them for the moment and make your sales and your trades, but yeah, they're a big asterisk. Unfortunately, FTX everybody thought was solid, and now here we are. But that's how it goes. So we've kind of talked on how important gaming is to the metaverse. Do you think that, looking at healthcare, looking at government, all of these different angles, I think you already hit on it when you're talking about the kind of gamification of people getting healthy, right? Like encouraging people to be healthy. So do you think that that game element is essentially required to kind of make your metaverse a success? Like, it seems like there almost has to be some type of sticky, like reason that's almost entertaining, if
I think
not.
it
Yeah.
depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So, I mean, the other area where I'm really interested in gamification, and it's very topical because COP 27 is in Egypt right now,
Right.
is around using gamification to incentivize people around climate action, and to be able to help them understand what are the things they can do, whether it's managing their own climate footprint, or whether it's, getting incentives for landowners in the Amazon not to cut down the trees and different things like that, or to sequester carbon in the soil. I think that gamification can connect the whole world around shared issues, of the commons, like climate change, and get people taking action. And I'd love to see that happen at scale. And there are people in COP at the moment who are actually creating a DAO for climate action. And I think if you have some gamification aspects in there, and, a bit like Pokemon Go or something, they're running around cleaning up the oceans, or cleaning up the
For
beaches,
sure.
or whatever it is you're wanting them to do, I think that would be great. And I think it's absolutely got a place when you've got a call to action for people.
Most definitely. And so again, it kind of comes down to maybe more so of the augmented reality and the ability to kind of do a lot of things on your phone and make it fun and incentivize it, for sure. That's amazing. So I noticed that, or you mentioned that you're in Dubai. You do a lot of work based in Dubai. So looking at the kind of culture down there and maybe the global elements of Web3, they're fairly tech forward. What's the NFT community like out there? And then the metaverse community, how are they kind of embracing blockchain metaverse?
Oh, honestly, it's absolutely spectacular here, and there's no other word for it. Even in the last 2 months, I think I've probably been to 8 metaverse events, and there've been triple the number of NFT events. The government has its metaverse strategy, and it's very future forward in terms of wanting all aspects of the community to embrace the metaverse. It's incentivizing tech companies to come here by it's tax free for one, but there are different economic zones that offer benefits for tech companies to come here. And so, even in a year, I've just seen this continue to grow from strength to strength. It's a very diverse community, which is exciting too, because you've got people from all around the world here. So you don't have that kind of monoculture thinking. People bring different thinking here, and it's absolutely vibrant and an incredibly exciting place to be. And you don't call it the Middle East for nothing. It's in the middle, which means that pretty much everyone from everywhere comes through here sometimes. So I see all my friends and colleagues from all around the world because they all at some point come through here. So on every count, this is an amazing place to be.
That's exciting. I got to get out there one day. Maybe my Web3 travels will take me there. I'm going to be going to Art Basel in Miami at the end of the month or beginning of December, and looking at the kind of global scope of Web3, right? And I feel like even the metaverse, whether Web2 or Web3, is making the world a lot smaller, right? It's bringing us closer together. So how do you view kind of the global impacts of Web3, and do you think it's, like I said, making the world smarter or smaller, sorry, and kind of bringing us closer together? And do you think that, some powers that be that obviously have concerns with the blockchain and maybe that kind of like breaking down of borders, how do you view that kind of from a futurist angle? Do you think that it's kind of a healthy evolution, and as the world gets smaller, economic opportunities expand and become more accessible for other corners of the globe that have been historically disadvantaged? How do you see that evolving?
Well, that's what I think is the promise of the technology, but we're in that kind of very uncomfortable shakedown period, if I could say. And FTX has not been helpful because it's going to bring the regulators down like a ton of bricks. But I still believe this this technology is going to be regulated, and it should be regulated. And the reason that I believe that is we don't want money laundering, terrorist financing, and people losing all of their savings. So there has to be some element of reasonableness in the community. And we've learned continuously since Mount Gox that we've got lots of bad actors who don't have any compunction in
Apparently.
stealing other people's money. So I think it's appropriate, but we need the kind of regulation that doesn't stifle innovation. So we need thoughtful partnerships with the regulators to think about how you protect consumers and stop money laundering and terrorist financing, but how you get those bigger picture benefits for people. But what I'm excited about, and you talked about decentralized science, is that all of the knowledge in the world is not held by centralized institutions. So people are building all around the world metaverse and blockchain and so forth. And what we need to do is also this kind of decentralized sourcing of knowledge and information so that we can be sharing what awesome things are being built in Nigeria right now, or in Cambodia, Vietnam, Canada, and bring them all together so we can share them, so other people can use this knowledge and deploy it in their settings. The other point that you made, which I think is really important, and again, this is going to be a really huge question when you've got these decentralized virtual economies that don't exist in any particular jurisdiction. Then there are just so many challenges how to think about managing and regulating them, and kind of ensuring that people are protected when they belong to these different communities. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because our world, our governance is very much designed for an analog system. It's not designed for the virtual state, which sure as eggs are eggs, we'll be having virtual states, and some people are already creating them. And then,
Yeah.
how that is all going to work, I don't have the answer to, but I know that it's going to be an issue that we're going to be contending with. And then if you kind of add that together with the knowledge that 70% of the world's population are going to live in cities by 2050, then you start asking the question, and I think people will ask the question then, if the city state is that place where I live that actually needs to look after me and my needs and provide for my safety, security, education, and so forth, then what do we need these other governments that are just, governing parts of the world that were probably created after the Second World War? Because a lot of countries, were aggregated after the Second World War. So I feel that we may start to see a breakdown of what we now know as sovereign states into smaller parcels, which are around cities, which are much more relevant to people. So I do think we're at a kind of turning point, and no one really knows where it's going. And most people don't even get that we're there. So it is going to be an interesting time.
That is definitely the case. Yeah. Looking at the potential for municipal levels of government to continue to have more and more influence within the construct of your national government and your provincial governments. I'm not sure, if there's going to be a real breakdown of that sovereign state, but it is definitely an interesting potentiality that could come out. So looking at just the blockchain, then, to your point about the scammers and the unfortunate people who have no issue stealing other people's money and using it for really horrible investments. How do you view the future of the blockchain? Like, do you think it's going to be like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all their layer twos, maybe Tezos, Solana, like a really small handful of blockchains, or how do you think that's going to go?
Look, I think we're still in the early days of the internet. And, in 2017, when I started to get very active in blockchain, you could be forgiven for thinking there were only two platforms, Ethereum and Bitcoin. And no one was talking about the other platforms. And yet, we've seen the growth of all of these newer platforms: Solana, Cardano, Algorand, Celo, NEM, you name it, there's just bunches of them. And they're all building different things for different purposes. And I just think we're going to see a proliferation, and then we're going to start to see the ones that, get the users, because in the end, all of these blockchains depend on their community. And if you can't get a community of people who are building on your blockchain, you will not survive. And I
Right.
think at this moment, Ethereum absolutely has a huge advantage because they were earlier and they've got a huge community that build on them. But I think we're starting to see some of these other blockchains growing their communities, but also some of them, like Algorand and Hedera, that are really targeting enterprise. And so they
Right.
want a different group of users than maybe some of the others. So that's a really long way of answering your question. And my answer is we don't yet know.
Yeah. I guess I'm just thinking about, like, when looking at FTX, looking at these things that can happen, and the fact that it feels like the only way to actually regulate against that is to kind of, at some point, the faucet for these random cryptocurrencies that are solving A problem, B problem, C problem, unless they can prove that their actual, practicality, exists, there'd be some mechanism to shut them down. But as I say that, I'm realizing, it's so centralized, it's so antithesis to everything that the blockchain is supposed to be about. So I guess the question then becomes, how do you get that regulation that guards against the FTXs and a few others that I won't name yet because they haven't fallen? But it seems to me like that is an ongoing problem. But as long as Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but the blockchain more broadly, is kind of thriving and continuing to evolve, unfortunately, it's just kind of a necessary evil. Honestly, that's what it seems like. I don't know. Do you think there's any silver bullet for that, or how do you see it? Kind of, you just leave it to the regulators and hope that they choose a good option?
No, you absolutely don't leave it to the regulators. This needs to be a collaboration, and a friendly, constructive collaboration
Hmm.
between industry and the regulators, because the regulators also, they're catching up with a lot of this stuff. But interestingly, and you may or may not know, right now at the G20, there's also the V20, which is the virtual asset service providers meeting at the G20, where people are coming together and trying to discuss what are the issues for the VASPs. And so I think that's the kind of relationship that we need to encourage and stimulate, which is responsible people within the community that are trying to grow this technology, grow its legitimate usage, make it available for people in a safe and secure way, are working with the regulators to help understand what their problems are and to help give them ideas about how you might regulate this new asset class, because it might, you've got securities regulators, you've got commodities regulators, and then you've got the FATF, anti-terrorism, money laundering group, and they all look at different things. So a lot of people think there's one thing that's blockchain and it's going to be regulated by one authority, and that's actually not correct. So
Right.
everyone needs to work together hand in hand to try and get this right.
That's definitely the case, and so we'll keep having these conversations. It's another part of the show. It's we're trying to push the conversation forward and identify maybe best case solutions, and hope that maybe some regulator somewhere is listening and gets into the right body of government. So looking at the tech for sustainability, and I know you've touched on this a little bit, but how do you see the kind of blockchain and the metaverse fitting into the overarching sustainability initiative? Like ESG is a huge element that corporations more and more are trying to embrace and show leadership on. And there's proof that it actually helps the bottom line. People want to know that your corporation is actually creating a more sustainable world, and looking at these factors, whether it's social sustainability, environmental, and even governance, right? So how do you see that fitting in with the metaverse and blockchain kind of conversation?
Well, I think again, just we'll stay in keeping with COP, because that's what's going on in Egypt. If you think about blockchain and climate action, and just by the way, I'm really happy to say that I've just developed a short course for the sustainability city here in blockchain and climate action. So I'm feeling fresh on that topic. But
Nice.
I think you've got all of the green finance and green tokens and green security offerings and so forth. So you've got that aspect of it. And then you've got the ability to be able to tokenize assets. So the tokenization of carbon credits, for example. You've got the peer-to-peer renewable energy exchange, like the Brooklyn microgrid. But if you take that down to people who are in villages in India, they can have a small solar panel and they can be selling small amounts of solar electricity to people to charge their phones or their lights and get micro payments for that. So there's that whole area of the renewable energy and grids and so forth. And then you have measurement, verification, and reporting, which is so critical in all aspects of sustainability, but in climate in particular, both the movement of climate finance, the measurement of carbon footprint, the verification of carbon credits and so forth. It's critical, and all of that can be enabled and secured and verified on the blockchain. And then finally, all of that I spoke about, the gamification, the DAOs for climate action, incentivizing people to take actions that will improve. In this case, I'm talking about climate, but you could be talking about any other aspect of sustainability. So, my answer to you is it's really, really relevant. Most people don't understand it. In terms of metaverse, I go back to the point that I made before, which is unless we can find a better way of making it available to many people, which is why I'm talking kind of, mobile augmented reality style, it's really not going to have the widespread impact that we'd love it to. But in terms of helping people understand sustainability problems, if you can just take them through the metaverse to the Amazon, or to where corals are being depleted in the oceans, or where desertification's taking place, or communities are being forced to move because of lack of water, then you're going to be able to educate and inspire people to take this seriously. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and we hope that there are things that are going to be realized with the incredible support of the tech community who are coming up with these brilliant innovations and building the future.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, I like what you're saying as far as that accountability and tracking. And I think that's one of the most obvious kind of low hanging fruit like use cases to further sustainability by using blockchain. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily crypto, right? Even just the distributed ledger technology helps you kind of manage that side of things. And looking at governance as well, do you think that there's a role to play for governments to actually embrace blockchain or even just distributed ledger technology to kind of look at government funds and add that layer of kind of transparency and accountability, especially in corners where there is more rampant corruption, obviously? Those will probably be the last people to embrace it, but I feel like that's a real solution for them.
But even if you take a step back from government and just think about things like humanitarian settings, so 80% of humanitarian support is either money or logistics to people, and blockchain is going to enable the tracking and veracity of the supply chains and the direct transfer of money to people in need, and that's particularly critical in a crisis situation. And we saw that in Afghanistan when everyone was trying to flee the country. The crypto community actually mobilized and made direct transfers to people who were trying to get tickets to get out of the country, or to people to buy food and blankets and so forth because winter was coming on. So it enables that. And the other thing which is important is if you think about, again, remittances and humanitarian transfers, when you go through the bank or you go through Western Union, it takes 2 or 3 days, and they'll take anything from sort of 6 to 30%. And if you then compare that with the possibility that I can just send you directly now to
Exactly.
your mobile phone some money that you can then go and use for something, it's incredibly powerful, and it'll allow people to get access to the funds, the much needed funds more quickly, but it'll also take that money out of the hands of the intermediaries who currently make the transfers and put it back in for the beneficiaries. So there's so many applications, and I remember, and I won't be able to tell you where, but I remember a couple of years ago reading that one of the big US procurement agencies actually did a use case test where they were using blockchain and AI to evaluate major tenders, and they reduced the tender evaluation from 100 days to 10 days because it can just, increase the speed of the analysis, especially of financial data, to much faster means. So I think governments will use that, banks will use it, and others will continue to use it because it contributes to speed,
Yeah.
transparency, efficiency, and however we use the word immutable, it's very hard to change. Once you've got it on
Exactly.
the chain, you can't
Exactly.
change it.
Yeah, accountability, and that's why we always go back to the technology is king, when it's going to streamline processes, it's going to help increase revenue, you're not going to say no to it. It doesn't make any sense. I did want to ask you before we wrapped on the D1 Metaverse Dome. I believe that's what you were showing in that CNN interview as well, was it?
Oh yes.
Yeah, so I was
That's in
curious about
the
what
Museum
exactly
of the
that.
Future here in Dubai, which is an incredible building.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It looked amazing. Again, I want to visit for sure. But the Metaverse Dome specifically, could you tell us a little bit about it and what the purpose is?
Well, I think the whole Museum of the Future, but in particular that part of it. So that part of the Museum of the Future kind of simulates, if I could say, metaverse-like experiences. So you walk in there and you have the feeling that there's sort of water splashing up amongst your feet, but there's not, or that you're in a. I felt like I was in some sort of incredible three-dimensional spa for the experience, and so it just gives you an immersive metaverse-like experience through the different technologies and areas of that dome. And anyone who comes to Dubai, come to the Museum of the Future, but it's pretty booked out. So you need to book your tickets in advance
You got to
and
talk to Dr.
definitely
Jane.
going
She'll
to
hook you up.
that area. Yeah, it's really not confronting's the wrong word, but it sort of challenges your sensory experience in a very interesting, but, in the end, a very positive way.
Nice, nice. And you foresee a future where that's used for like meditation and kind of healthcare elements, and maybe
Oh,
just a
yeah. In
yeah,
fact, I went, there's a metaverse company here called Vault Hill. The founder's a guy called Jimmy Dado, and they've collaborated with an NFT digital artist, Amrita Sethi. And when you go into their metaverse, Amrita's created this incredible kind of metaverse dome zone that you go into, and
nice.
it's all about kind of relaxation, and when you go in there, like, you literally don't want to leave. It's amazing. So I'm sure we're going to see many more of those kinds of experiences.
That's very cool. Yeah, no, it's exciting. I love just brainstorming and thinking about what the future holds. So I'm glad we were able to pick your brain, Dr. Jane. Before we wrap, I just wanted to ask, what do you say to those people who are kind of scared of the digitization of everything, right? I think there's an element, and, yeah, in some cases, it's might be age situation, might be just, comfortable, your level of comfort with the technology. But from a philosophical perspective, right, from kind of a, you know, we want to be in nature, touching real grass, and like, having a real, I guess, physical connection to the world. And then this metaverse is coming in and kind of saying, hey, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just get there through the comfort of your house. And as that continues to evolve and continues to, become an easy option for people, are there concerns around, not getting enough nature, or concerns around just the overall idea that it's normal to just go and do everything digitally and not, IRL? What do you say to those who are kind of scared of that? I'm seeing some of this as I love to look at videos and read different perspectives from across the tech space. There are, people who consider themselves tech advocates who don't like the kind of metaverse trajectory and even maybe the blockchain trajectory as well. So what do you say to those people, and what are your thoughts on some of those concerns?
So we already know that there are, mental and physical health consequences of doing nothing but gaming, 365 days a year, or, so people who are in these worlds who overuse them, to their detriment. This is something we need to be aware of and expect in this new world, and try and manage and mitigate it. But almost, people are prone to excess, but I don't think that's most people are prone to excess. Some people are, and we need to kind of to try and think about ways to manage that. But I think we're going to live our lives between the virtual and the physical worlds. And if you just love going out into the forests and into the grass, you will, because the sensory experience you get from the real grass is going to be different than what you get in the metaverse. So I think it's going to be a matter of choices, but you'll probably find yourself going to do things that you find pleasurable in the metaverse, maybe going to a concert, or maybe getting some services that you need because it's easier to do that than to, go and drive half an hour down to your local GP and wait another half an hour in his waiting room before he sees you.
Yeah.
And then you get sent to the pharmacy and everywhere else. So, I think we've got to manage it. And I think it's going to be easier for younger generations coming up to understand and manage it. And for the older generations, I just say, don't close your minds. Just learn about it. Try and understand. Talk to your children about it, because they're going to be able to educate you probably better than you can get education anywhere else. And understand that the world of the past is not the world of the future. And we need to embrace that future and try and make it as safe and attractive and inclusive as we can.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And how important do you think those buzzwords, mass adoption, really are? Like, do we have to hit some
Well,
critical
honestly,
mass?
I think mass adoption makes me want to vomit. And I have to say that, because mass adoption, like, just don't be ridiculous.
Right.
And so I think, there's never going to be this world where every single person on the planet has adopted public decentralized blockchains. No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But what we want is widespread adoption of the technology in a way that's going to give people more of what they want and what they need. So I just think that's a word I'd like out of our vocabulary, because I think it's silly.
Yes.
But I think what we want is to build that, widespread adoption so people can benefit from the affordances of blockchain and decentralization.
Right. So make the knowledge of the tech widespread. Whether or not you get mass adoption is really irrelevant, right? It's just a matter of continuing to show the power of the technology and those who need it. Like you were just mentioning with Western Union, my father sends money to Sierra Leone and West Africa fairly often, and I've been trying to tell him, like, just use Cello or use Bitcoin, like the Lightning Network or whatever. Anything is better than Western Union, so we're still kind of checking that out and doing the research, but hopefully soon we'll make that change. But it's just a perfect example, right, of like, I'm here advocating for Web3 and my dad's still using Western Union to send money out. So, it's unfortunately the way things are going. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
that's funny.
Yeah, so that's cool. I think that's all the questions I had. Do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap up here? I really appreciate your time, and I'm grateful for also connecting me with a couple other interesting people in the space. So thank you for that, and I really look forward to continuing to see how this metaverse advocacy grows and how the space continues to evolve. But do you have anything to add?
No, it's such a pleasure. I love being on your podcast, and I love the way you think about things. And thanks for everyone for listening and having me on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Jane. With that, we will be back next Saturday. And thank you so much. And until next time, we will catch you in the metaverse. Peace out. All right. So, anybody have any feedback for us before we shut her down? Thank you again to Dr. Jane Thomason for those very interesting and enlightening perspectives. She's really deeply immersed in the metaverse conversation, as I'm sure you could tell. And like one of the connections she's made is Joshua Scagill from the Standard.io, who's going to be our next guest next week, who has a long history in blockchain and Bitcoin. So really looking forward to that next week. Definitely tune in. Hopefully my cold will be a little bit more cleared up and good to go. Apologies. But thank you, Sasha, for dropping in, and anybody else who's in the chat. If you don't have any other further questions, we'll have the full podcast live on all the major podcast networks by this afternoon, and the video will be live on YouTube as well by this afternoon. And I do appreciate all of the support. Special shout out to the listeners on Fountain as well. The Fountain app is a very cool Web3 podcasting app where you can support the podcaster through Satoshis and also just gain some Satoshis yourself. So cool way to earn a little bit of Bitcoin. But much love, everybody's tuned in, and please do tune in to the official podcast, and we'll be live next Saturday as always. And until then, we'll catch you in the metaverse. Peace.